Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here, and today I'm going to be doing a video centered around Anthony Davis and basically some possible trade scenarios that I could see going down for him. If you're unfamiliar, Anthony Davis has been in the news a lot lately. A lot of teams want to get their hands on him. He's seen as basically the hottest commodity in the NBA right now. And so I've devised 5 trade scenarios in which I could see Anthony Davis being traded to any 5 of these teams. And obviously, the Lakers and Celtics are on here because those are the 2 teams that everybody's talking about. So I'm going to do those 2 teams first, sort of get them out of the way, so to speak, and then I'll do 3 other teams that I could see trade scenarios happening for. Um, and we're just going to get into it. All right, so starting off here, so I got the first team I have on here is the Celtics. And so I have going to Boston, Anthony Davis, Solomon Hill, who's on an expiring contract for $12 million, and Wesley Johnson, who's also on an expiring contract for $6 million. They're basically just throw-ins to make the salaries work better. Um, and then for New Orleans, I have them receiving Al Horford, Marcus Morris, Jaylen Brown, and Terry Rozier. And if New Orleans plays hardball and wants more, I have Boston sending Jason Tatum instead of Jaylen Brown, and also throwing in the Kings' first-round pick for this year, which they might have to give them if that's something that New Orleans would want. So for Boston, your starting lineup after this trade would look something. Let's say that they accept Jaylen Brown instead of Jason Tatum. Your starting lineup would look like Kyrie Irving, Marcus Smart, or let's see here. It would be Kyrie Irving, Jaylen Brown, Gordon Hayward, Anthony Davis, and Aaron Baines, with Marcus Smart as your main guy off the bench, along with like Daniel Tice. So the bench would be considerably weaker, but you'd obviously be getting Anthony Davis, who is a top 10 player in the NBA, potentially top 5, depending on how you see it. And you'd be set up for years to come, considering that they'd probably re-sign Kyrie in the offseason. So they'd be looking pretty good. For New Orleans, you obviously lose a great player, but you gain a lot of depth, which is something that they were significantly lacking. You also get an established point guard to play alongside Jrue Holiday. The Pelicans have been talking lately about how they want to permanently move Jrue Holiday to a shooting guard position, but they don't really have an established point guard to play alongside him because Elfrid Payton is out injured for a while now, and at best he's like a poor starter or good backup. But Terry Rozier proved in the playoffs last year he can be a pretty competent starter, so they would start him, Jrue Holiday, Jaylen Brown likely at the small forward, and then probably Mirotic at power forward and Horford at center, with Julius Randle coming off the bench along with Marcus Morris and E'Twaun Moore. So while they would lose the star power of Davis, they still would get back a really promising young player in Jaylen Brown, an established perennial all-star in Al Horford, and then a good starting point guard in Terry Rozier, along with a guy off the bench in Marcus Morris. So they essentially trade one rotation player for 4, which is valuable because their depth is pretty significantly lacking currently. Okay, so moving on to the next trade scenario, I have Davis going to the Los Angeles Lakers. Honestly, I don't see the Lakers getting him through trade just because I don't think they have really anything that the Pelicans would want, really. So in this trade, I have just Davis alone going to the Lakers, and in return, I have New Orleans getting Lonzo Ball, Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram, and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, who's just thrown in there to make the salaries match. Caldwell-Pope's on an expiring contract. I doubt that he re-signs with them in the offseason. So you're looking at Lonzo Ball, Ingram, and Josh Hart as the main trade incentives. I think that if New Orleans refuse to do this trade, you might have to swap out like Josh Hart for Kyle Kuzma, which I think the Lakers should do if they get the opportunity, because I think Anthony Davis is significantly better than any of these guys. Um, Again, similar problems are solved for New Orleans. You get a lot more depth, and you also get to fill in the point guard void. Starting lineup for New Orleans after this trade would look something like Lonzo Ball, Jrue Holiday, Brandon Ingram, and then like Mirotic and Julius Randle with Josh Hart and KCP and Etuan Moore coming off the bench. Um, so you get more depth, but you do lose a really good player. But maybe, who knows what Brandon Ingram could become, or Lonzo, or Josh Hart, really. But you get a lot of promise in exchange for a guy who was potentially just going to leave and you weren't going to get anything for him. And getting something instead of nothing is always good, especially when it's three young, promising guys. You know, if you buy into all the NBA comparisons, they could be getting the next Jason Kidd, um, Kyle Korver, and Josh Hart, and Kevin Durant and Brandon Ingram. But that's highly unlikely. But still, this trade they might be willing to do if they get desperate enough. But as I say, I think this one's pretty unlikely. I don't see I see him going there as a free agent, but not in a trade, basically. Okay, so moving on past the Celtics and Lakers, now I'm on to the three teams that you basically couldn't have guessed before this. The first one is the Milwaukee Bucks. I have the Bucks receiving Anthony Davis and Solomon Hill, and in exchange I have New Orleans getting Eric Bledsoe, Chris Middleton, Malcolm Brogdon, and Thon Maker. Really, again, New Orleans gets a lot of depth, a lot of established players who can be pretty good for them, and they basically give up Anthony Davis and salary filler and Solomon Hill. So Milwaukee gives up a lot of depth too, and their roster would be very thin after this. But in the next offseason, they could definitely sign some free agents and rebuild and kind of retool, considering they'd have two of the best players in the NBA on their roster. Okay, so starting lineup for New Orleans after this trade would look like Eric Bledsoe at point guard, Drew Holiday at shooting guard, Middleton at small forward, Mirotic power forward, Julius Randle center, and then off the bench you'd have Malcolm Brogdon and Etuan Moore as your main guys. I think the thing that people wouldn't initially think about as much is that Chris Middleton is like a fringe all-star. He's basically, I don't want to say a poor man's Klay Thompson because that makes him sound bad, but he's like a slightly worse version of Klay Thompson, which I think is a very valuable thing. He's 6'8", he can play as shooting guard or small forward. He's very talented, great three-point stroke, can be a good scorer, can get you 20 points a game. Eric Bledsoe can get you 16 to 18 points a game, along with 6 to 7 assists a game on decent efficiency. He can take over a game if you need him to. And Malcolm Brogdon's like a great sixth man, which is something that New Orleans they had sort of in like Julius Randle, but I meant as far as like backcourt and wing help, they didn't really have that, and they would gain that in Malcolm Brogdon. Of course, do I think in a vacuum that like Bledsoe, Middleton, and who would I rather have to start a franchise? Malcolm Brogdon, Middleton, and Bledsoe, or Davis? Probably Davis, but I mean that's pretty good compensation for him. You're getting like three NBA starting caliber players, one like fringe all-star player. That's some pretty good value. I think that both teams would be willing to do this. As far as what Milwaukee's starting lineup would look like afterwards, I think you'd have like George Hill at starting point guard, Tony Snell shooting guard, Giannis Antetokounmpo small forward, Anthony Davis power forward, Brook Lopez center. Off the bench, your main guys would be like Dante DiVincenzo and Ersan Ilyasova. So your bench would be very weak, but you'd have a pretty solid starting lineup, I'd say, between just those two guys. And as I say, they can sign guys in the offseason too to fill in holes and improve their depth. Next trade I have on here, number 4, would be between the Pelicans and the Timberwolves. I have the Timberwolves receiving Anthony Davis, Solomon Hill, and Wesley Johnson. The latter two mostly as a salary filler. And then I have New Orleans receiving Andrew Wiggins, Jeff Teague, and Dario Saric. Because I've included Dario Saric in this trade and he recently got traded from Philadelphia to Minnesota, the trade I think has to go through a threshold of a couple months before he can be traded again. But okay, so let's say we wait a couple months and then trade him again. New Orleans is receiving a guy who can score 20 to 22 points a game in Wiggins if he's given the reins of the offense and seen as the primary option. Dario Saric can score 10 to 14 points a night depending on his role in the offense. He can space the floor. He's a good shooter. He can actually pass the ball pretty decent as well. He's a decent ball handler for a 6'10 power forward. So I like him all right. I think he's kind of a duplicate of Mirotic. Like they play the same position, can kind of do some of the same things, but still he'd give you depth because they would need to replace Anthony Davis because he's a big man, so they'd need a big man to replace him. And then Jeff Teague, again, a problem that I've been talking about for the past a few of the other trade scenarios. Uh, what New Orleans wants is an established point guard to be able to play alongside Drew Holiday because they want him to more play shooting guard, and you get that in Jeff Teague, a guy who can handle the reins really well. Is an all-star from a few years ago, a good player. So yeah, I think that this again is some decent value. I think New Orleans would have to become a little bit more desperate to get something back, but it's not a terrible trade for them. Also, none of like all of these guys you get for Teague and Dario Saric you get for 2 years. Wiggins you get for a long time. Yes, he's on a max contract, so they may not like that, but the Timberwolves could also do something like throw in 2 first-round picks as well to get Davis. As for the Timberwolves, you do give up essentially 3 rotation players for 1, but you could say you have the best front court in the NBA, I'd say, between Anthony Davis and Towns. Both guys can play inside pretty well, have good games facing the basket or with back to the basket. They both do all right. They both can shoot it from 3-point land to space the floor for the other if the other wants to work down low. We'd sort of get like an Anthony Davis, DeMarcus Cousins 2.0, except I'd say Towns is a bit of a better shooter than DeMarcus Cousins, and obviously considerably younger, about 6 to 7 years younger. So you would get more time for Davis and Towns to develop. Starting lineup and additional lineup. Well, I'll go through it for New Orleans first real quick. You'd have Teague at point, Holiday at shooting guard, Wiggins small forward. Power forward, I think you'd actually go Saric, starting center, Randall off the bench. You'd have Mirotic. I think you'd have Mirotic coming off the bench because he could play a little bit of center too, whereas I don't think Saric could really stub in and play center at all. So off the bench you'd have Mirotic and E'Twaun Moore, and then Alfred Payton when he comes back. So an okay bench, a guy who can score 17 points a game off the bench, and Mirotic, which is pretty good. For the Timberwolves, your starting lineup would look something like, I'm trying to think here, probably Derrick Rose at point guard. Shooting guard, you'd probably have to go with Josh Okogie. Small forward, Covington. Power forward, Davis. Center, Towns. And then off the bench, you'd have like Taj Gibson, Tyus Jones, Gorgui Dieng, and Tolliver. So again, a weaker bench, but still a pretty strong starting lineup between Rose, Davis, and Towns. That's a pretty good lineup. Your wing depth is a little weak with Okogie having to start. Again, they could address stuff in the offseason and pick up a wing. You might even have to see Luol Deng play a little bit more than he has been playing, which is virtually none at all. He hasn't been really playing this year. So that being said, this trade I don't really ever see happening, but it could, and it wouldn't be a terrible trade for either team. I think it would actually help both teams a decent amount. That being said, let's move on to my final trade, which is between New Orleans and the Denver Nuggets. I have Denver receiving again Davis, Solomon Hill, and Wesley Johnson, the latter two as salary filler. And then I have New Orleans receiving Paul Millsap, Gary Harris, Trey Lyles, and Monte Morris. So as far as what New Orleans gets, Paul Millsap, perennial all-star, declining a little bit as far as his abilities, but really still a good player, still capable of doing pretty well, scoring 16 points a night, 8 rebounds, which is not bad whatsoever. Still a really good defender. Gary Harris, a guy that can score you 18 points a night if he's given the reins on offense. Pretty good player. Obviously, I don't know. You'd probably say he's like the best player that they'd be getting back. So not great, but still, if Davis is going to walk in free agency in the year after this one, it's better than nothing. You're getting a guy who is really promising, still super young, on a reasonable contract for what he's giving you. And then Monte Morris, a really good point guard for what people thought he was going to be. This year he's scoring 10 points a game, shooting 49% from the field, 45% from three, which is really good. Um, 3 rebounds a game, 4 assists a game. A guy that who you could definitely plug in next to Jrue Holiday and he'd play pretty well. And then Trey Lyles, who you could start or bring in off the bench. He could play a little bit of center, but he's more of a power forward. Um, Decent shot. Basically, just a really solid backup, in my opinion. So New Orleans lineup after this would probably look something like, Monte Morris probably starting with Jrue Holiday at shooting guard. Maybe Gary Harris is like a small forward, or you could also have Darius Miller start at small forward. Power forward Paul Millsap, center Julius Randle. Then off the bench you get Trey Lyles, Mirotic, E'Twaun Moore, and Gary Harris if they want to bring him in off the bench. So in this scenario, you get some good replacements and you get an extreme amount of depth and a lot of scoring options. And so from that perspective, I like it for New Orleans. For Denver, your starting lineup after this trade is going to look something like Jamal Murray, Will Barton at shooting guard. At small forward, probably Torrey Craig, who has been starting a bit for them at small forward. Power forward, Davis. Center, Nikola Jokic. Off the bench, you still got Plumlee and Hernan Gomez and Malik Beasley. So you basically just give up your depth for one really good star player. And I think that I could really see this trade happening in that New Orleans is getting a good amount of stuff back because Denver's done a great job of kind of like finding these diamonds in the rough between Trey Lyles and Monte Morris and stuff like that. So those guys aren't really throw-ins. They're actually like good, valuable pieces that they're getting back. Besides that, they've done other really good jobs of finding valuable players who haven't been good. And then they come to Denver and do a good job, like Hernan Gomez, Malik Beasley, guys who are pretty good for not being expected to be good. That being said, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found these trade scenarios interesting. I had a fun time putting them together. Let me know in the comments what you think would be good trades or bad trades, or even suggest trades of your own for me. And I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you later. Bye.